going to get straight to the point. The state of Texas is literally and legally being invaded. And I'm not clickbaiting you or sensationalizing events happening in Texas. According to Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, he has invoked the right to defend himself and his state because he says he is being invaded. And this is not like Greg Abbott trying to turn this into a massive story. No, he's taking this in a literal and military sense that he has the right to use his National Guard and state authorities to properly defend his state. So let us dig into all of the facts and evidence because Texas is saying the federal government has left Texas to dry, leaving Texas just to deal with the migrant problem, and Texas is saying no more. We are being invaded. We have the right to defend ourselves. Now, do me the biggest favor, since this channel doesn't do sponsors, make sure you at least like or leave your opinions down in the comments, but also turn on your notifications. It's working. When you turn on your notifications, you won't miss a video, and it helps this channel out a lot, and it helps you out a lot not to miss any information. Okay, so you need to understand Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, has always been rather outspoken on the issues of what's happening in Texas. Now, there are tons of issues, but I'm going to try and focus on the National Guard's mission known as the Lone Star mission in Texas. So in March of 2021, Texas began their operation known as Lone Star, and this had a lot of black eyes and a lot of issues. Essentially, the Texas National Guard, all of a sudden, military members became border crossing guards, and they became kind of Homeland Security, kind of do whatever the federal government tells them, and there was a massive, and I mean massive, black eye on this mission. There were a ton of issues, there was pay issues, soldiers didn't have proper living conditions, and there was a lot of negativity about this entire mission. And again, this could be like a 2-hour video on all of the complications because of this mission, but I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward all the way up to 2024. Essentially, Texas is saying that the federal government was not allowing for Texas to actually implement their guardsmen to do their jobs. Now, if you've ever spoken to any military member who's ever worked on the border, essentially what happens is these soldiers will show up on the border, or sometimes Marines, and they're just plopped in a random location, and they're really not allowed to do anything other than call out what's happening. And in the absolute worst case scenario, where the soldier probably is in a very compromised position, then they can use force. But for the most part, the federal government is who's doing the job, so Homeland Security or border crossing. And so because of this, Greg Abbott decided, you know what, I'm going to do things my way, and I'm going to look into what the Constitution says and how I have the right to defend myself. Now, the National Guard is a very odd organization, not in the sense that the soldiers are all weird, but in the sense of they fall under the control of Greg Abbott, or your governor of the state. But when fully activated, they also fall under the DoD, Department of Defense, when activated. So again, they're sort of in like a weird mix of their state's guardsmen, but could also fall under the entirety of an active unit. Now, in this case, Greg Abbott realized that he has almost no control of his guardsmen because the federal government always will trump the guardsmen. And in the case of Homeland Security, according to Texas, they are not allowing for the guardsmen to actually do their job. What is the point of spending all of this money, according to Texas, on this Lone Star mission if our guardsmen are just standing there trying to look tough when these migrants are just walking right past them because the federal government is not doing their job? This is in accordance to Greg Abbott and to Texas. Thus, we have a letter to the United States and to the world. Governor Greg Abbott dropped this letter on January 24th, 2024, and it's a very powerful statement invoking his right to utilize the full capacity of his state's guardsmen and his state protectors, again, to protect from an invasion. I'm going to read some key components of this letter, but I'm going to leave a link for you so you can go ahead and read the entirety of it. And I think it gives us an interesting look into how the U.S. government works and the U.S. Constitution, where if states have the valid right to protect themselves and they provide the valid evidence, states do have the right to protect themselves and use the proper guard assets to do so. Okay, so the first paragraph, the federal government has broken the compact between the United States and the states. The executive branch of the United States has a constitutional duty to enforce federal laws protecting the states, including immigration laws on the books right now. President Biden has refused to enforce those laws and has even violated them. The result is that he has smashed records for illegal immigration. And again, please stick with me. I'm going to try and make this entertaining and educational at the same time. We're going to get into the exact articles Greg Abbott is talking about where, yes, the states have to submit to the federal government, but the federal government also has the obligation to protect the states. So again, there's a weird middle line here where if a state has proper cause and concern that the federal government is leaving them hanging, which is what Texas is saying, Texas has the right to defend themselves. President Biden has violated his oath to faithfully execute immigration laws enacted by Congress. Instead of prosecuting immigrants for the federal crime of illegally entry, President Biden has sent his lawyers into federal courts to sue Texas for taking action to secure the border. And I've been covering this for a very long time. I already know Greg Abbott is talking about his floating buoy barriers, where Greg Abbott paid a contracting company to install these floating buoy barriers to prevent migrants from crossing into an area known as Eagle Pass. Now, there has been a lot of cause for concern again for this barrier because there's been some unfortunate casualties from migrants trying to get over the Rio Grande, but this is what Abbott is specifically talking about for sure in this statement. President Biden has instructed his agencies to ignore federal statutes that mandate the detention of illegal immigrants. The effect is to illegally allow them in mass parole into the United States. And by wasting taxpayer dollars to tear open Texas border security infrastructure, President Biden has enticed illegal immigrants away from the 28 legal entry points along this state's southern border, bridges where nobody drowns, and into the dangerous waters of the Rio Grande. And again, to verify, there is an area in Texas known as Eagle Pass. If you've seen the whole Elon Musk visiting the Texas border, he went over to Eagle Pass to evaluate the situation. The Rio Grande, for some reason, at Eagle Pass is super, super low, like ankle deep in some parts. And it looks like some parts, migrants just get on a train and hop right over into the United States. Greg Abbott is saying all of these migrants are coming to Eagle Pass and other areas where the Rio Grande is super low, even though there are legal checkpoints and safer checkpoints for migrants to go to. But why would a migrant wait in line when I can just walk right through the Rio Grande and right into the United States? Even if I get detained, they're going to let me go and I might end up in Chicago or I might end up in the Northeast somewhere. Who knows? Now, this number is quite staggering, and I think really any American will see this and be like, okay, this might be an issue. Under President Biden's lawless border policies, more than 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern borders in just 3 years. That is a lot. Look, as somebody who's never dealt with border issues, I'm from New York and I now live in Tennessee. But the thing is this, like, we know it's happening, but unless you fully live in those border states where they deal with it every day, and a lot of people, a lot of farmers and businesses, they're afraid for their lives a lot of the times because when you have 6 million people coming into your country, it can be an issue. And I think collectively many Americans are extremely sympathetic to the fact of these migrants are trying to come into America for a better life. Without a doubt, a majority of Americans know that. But it becomes a massive issue when we don't know who these 6 million people are, and a majority of them are unfortunately undocumented. Okay, so here's the part where the federal government has to and legally has to protect the states. The failure of the Biden administration to fulfill the duties imposed by Article 4. 4 has triggered Article 1 and 10, Clause 3. Again, let us look into all of this real quick. Okay, under the Constitution, Section 4, or Article 4, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union and republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive against domestic violence. And in case you are unaware, Texas has already taken the steps on the state level to already designate cartel members on the terror list. And so because of this, Texas already has a jump if the United States wants to take Texas to court, where Texas is saying, look, a lot of these guys are coming into our state and you're not protecting us from what? An invasion. So, under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state. So, states cannot work together and essentially form their own militaries. That is a great thing. You don't want that happening. Or with a foreign power or engage in war. Unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. And look, Texas is saying in the last 3 years we've had 6 million people coming into our country. We have not been able to stop all of them. And Texas is saying it's only getting worse and worse and worse, especially now where migrants on the other side of the border, they're seeing the news and they're seeing that things are starting to tighten up. It's a very sad situation, but because of this, now you have a way more of an influx of migrants coming into the country. And so in my humble opinion, and I am not a lawyer, but when you do bring up all of the facts, it does look like Texas is technically being invaded and the federal government is really not doing its job in everything they do to stop these migrants from all coming in. Again, I am highly sympathetic to the fact that a lot of these migrants are coming for a better life. My dad is an immigrant, my mom is an immigrant, so I would be extremely hypocritical to be like, get out of our country. That is how the United States was created, was by immigrants. You need them for an extremely great nation that we have. But the point is this. Texas is literally, and again, officially saying, we have been invaded. And Texas has also been really good at covering their butts when it comes to the legality of things, like essentially calling the cartel a terror group. And, this is important, especially when they get brought into the court of law. Now, here's where things are getting very dicey, and here's where things can become aggressive internally. The National Guard has already taken over something called Shelby Park, where they are creating very small portals of entry using razor wire, and they're allowing migrants to come in, but they're either being processed or detained. Some people can come in, but most people have to go back. And so it looks like this is what Texas wants to do. They are now going to create their own borders and boundaries and their own portals of entry. But one thing I do want to say, and I do want to give credit to Texas, the main reason also, and this is from Texas themselves, they want to use the National Guard and actual military members is to try and keep the migrants away without it getting too far. Maybe seeing a military member, this would cause somebody to get a little nervous and maybe turn around. But I'm going to be honest with you, it doesn't look like the facts or evidence suggest that migrants could care either way. They come from destroyed countries, so what does it matter that a U.S. National Guardsman is standing in front of me? So things are starting to ramp up. I typically talk about the Middle East and Eastern Europe, but now Texas seems to become the hotspot of a literal invasion. And if they are tying this into a military invasion, I will be reporting this. So make sure you guys watch more of my videos on this topic. I've been talking about this for a long time, but this was taken to a whole new level where the National Guard now has jurisdiction over Homeland and other federal agencies. So let's see what happens. I hope there's not any internal disputes or fighting, because things could get very chaotic very fast when they are already very chaotic on the border. So we shall see what happens.